Let's step back in time. We're going to Manitoba, 1922, where the prairies were frozen solid as iron. And there, a community built entirely on faith and promises found itself facing a choice that would literally define its future, a choice between their covenant with God and the laws of their country.
This line just perfectly captures the feeling. For these Mennonite communities in southern Manitoba, life had this steady, predictable rhythm. But in the winter of 1922, you could feel that rhythm starting to break. Something was coming. The outside world was knocking on their door.
So, what was this storm brewing on the horizon? Well, it all came down to a promise. A promise made half a century earlier that had allowed them to build this life in Canada in the first place. And that promise was about to be broken.
You really have to understand their world. This wasn't just about speaking a different language. It was a whole different way of being. Their schools, taught in German, weren't just for reading and writing. They were the very bedrock of their faith, their culture. The promise that they could educate their own children their way was the reason they were even here.
And then, this started happening. Official letters, stamped with government seals, began showing up. These weren't friendly notes. These were a sign that the world they had so carefully kept at a distance was now insisting on coming in.
And here it is. This is the heart of the crisis laid out side by side. On one hand, you've got the government pushing for one unified English-speaking nation. And on the other, you have the absolute core beliefs of the Mennonites: freedom of education, pacifism, separation from the state. You can see there's no middle ground here. It's a total clash of worlds.
So, faced with this impossible conflict, the community had to figure out what to do. And as you can imagine, that decision didn't come easy. In fact, it threatened to tear them right down the middle.
Just try to picture this scene. The church is packed, not for a Sunday service, but for a crisis meeting. The air is thick with tension, the smell of wool coats and lantern oil. This is it. This is the room where they have to decide their entire future.
And you can just hear the anger in this farmer's voice. This is the argument for standing their ground. He's clinging to that original promise made to their ancestors. For him, it's a matter of honor, of a deal being a deal. It's a cry for justice. But then, this question cuts through all that anger, and it goes right to the core of their faith: non-violence. Fighting back wasn't an option. It was unthinkable. So this brings up the terrifying reality of what defiance actually means. What do you do when standing up for your rights goes against your deepest belief in pacifism?
Now, into this heated, impossible debate steps their leader, Bishop Isaak M. Dyck. And he frames the choice in a totally different way. Not as fighting versus surrendering, but as a question of obedience, and who you're obedient to.
With these words, the bishop just reframes the entire problem. He's not calling for a rebellion. He's making the argument that if the law of the land forces you to break the law of God, like your sacred duty to raise your children in the faith, then the only truly obedient path is to leave, to find another way. And with this one line from the Bible, the bishop basically seals the argument. This quote is about Abraham leaving his home, his country, for a promised land he had never even seen. You can imagine that verse just hanging in the air of that church. It was an admission of the immense sacrifice, the terrifying uncertainty they were facing, all for their faith.
Okay, so the debate in the church was one thing, but pretty soon, this abstract threat was about to become very, very real. It arrived in an automobile. I mean, what an image! This black Ford, a symbol of the modern industrial world, comes rattling into this quiet, traditional village. It's the outside world literally rolling in and shattering the peace.
And with those words, the confrontation begins. Two government officials walk into the tiny one-room schoolhouse, right in the middle of a hymn being sung in German. You could cut the tension with a knife.
And there it is. No more letters, no more debates. This is the final ultimatum, delivered right to the teacher in front of his students. The deadline is set. April 1st. The law is absolute. And just silence. The children's singing stops. The teacher is shaking. The only sound in the whole room is the crackling fire in the stove. In that moment, the full weight of the government's decision just settles over them all.
And this is where this massive community-wide crisis gets funneled down to its most personal level. A single family facing an impossible choice about their own son.
Now the stakes are laid bare.
right there at the kitchen table. It's not about principles anymore. The threat is about losing their own child to the state.
Anna's reaction, it captures the horror of every parent. Suddenly, this abstract law has a name and a face. It's their son, Peter. The idea that the government could just take him away because they want to teach him their own faith, it's just unthinkable.
So let's just pause on that for a second. What would you do? Seriously, do you comply just to keep your family together? Or do you risk absolutely everything, your home, your farm, your country, for what you believe in? That's the question they were facing.
And right there, in that moment of despair, something else is born. It's not a plan, not really a solution, it's just this tiny, stubborn flicker of hope. And the idea of leaving everything behind, the Exodus, it starts to shift from a terrifying nightmare into maybe the only path toward peace. Which brings us to our final question. The Mennonites were a people of peace, right? But the government forced them to ask what kind of peace they were willing to live with. Was it a compromised peace, living under someone else's rules, or a new, terrifyingly uncertain peace they would have to build for themselves thousands of miles from home? What price is too high for peace?